Will you be the father of my daughter for just one day? She's dying. Her only wish is to see her father, she begged the unknown billionaire. Hi, my beautiful family. It's your Mr. Peter. Before anything else, allow me to speak this prayer over your life, soft as a whisper, deep as forever, and filled with love meant only for you. May peace rise like sunlight in your soul today. May every heavy thought grow lighter with every breath. May kindness find its way to your doorstep, and may the love you've given return to you tenfold. I pray that your heart feels safe, your spirit feels strong, and that joy gently surprises you when you need it most. May healing touch what no one else can see, and may you always remember this: you are cherished, you are chosen, and you are endlessly loved. Now, Binta says hi, and she's sending you the biggest, warmest hug. She's deeply grateful for all your beautiful prayers for me. Her eyes filled with love as she said, "Please tell them I feel every kind word." But why are some leaving the story in the middle? That truly breaks our hearts. Family, please don't leave halfway. If you love me, if we've walked this journey together, stay with me to the very end. Every moment was written with care, with purpose, and with you in mind. I know some of you feel my introductions are long, and that's all right, my loves. You can skip this part if you need to, but please don't skip the story. It's my soul written in words, for you alone. Now tell me, with honesty and care, how did James do today? He's speaking from my heart, trying to carry my voice with love. If it reached you, let us know. If not, I'll always listen. Your heart matters here. And now, sweet family, like this video, drop a kind comment. Share it with someone who needs hope. Let the world feel this beautiful family, a family full of love, light, and unshakable support. Let's begin. With all my love, forever and always.
Mama, I can hear my heart breaking. The words fell from 6-year-old Rena's lips like drops of liquid sorrow, each syllable cutting through Cass Furness's chest deeper than any surgeon's blade ever could. In the sterile whiteness of the pediatric intensive care unit, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed with mechanical precision, a little girl was dying, and she understood exactly what that meant. Cass's hands trembled as she smoothed her daughter's dark curls, the same texture as her own, the same stubborn spirals that had never been tamed despite years of careful braiding. Rena's skin, usually a rich caramel that glowed with health, had taken on a grayish pallor that made Cass's throat close with terror. "Don't say that, baby," Cass whispered, forcing her voice to remain steady even as her world crumbled around her. "Your heart is strong. It's the strongest heart I know." Rena turned her head on the pillow, her large brown eyes, so much like Adam's it sometimes hurt to look at them, focusing on her mother with a wisdom that no 6-year-old should possess. "But Mama, it really is breaking. Not just the sick part. The lonely part, too." The machines surrounding them seemed to grow louder in the silence that followed. Cass closed her eyes, fighting back tears that threatened to spill over. 6 years. 6 years since Adam Barnhart had walked out of their tiny apartment, leaving nothing behind but a note on the kitchen counter and a baby who would never know her father's love. "I can't do this. I'm not ready to be a father. Don't try to find me." 23 words that had shattered 2 lives before one of them had even begun to truly live. "Mama," Rena continued, her small voice cutting through the memory, "when I watch the other kids here, they have visitors, grandpas and grandmas and aunties and—" She paused, the word catching in her throat. "Daddies." Cass opened her eyes to find Rena staring at the doorway, where just an hour earlier, little Tommy from the next room had been swept up in his father's arms, spinning and laughing despite the IV line still attached to his hand. The joy on that child's face had been radiant, infectious, everything Cass wanted for her own daughter but could never provide alone. I see how they look at each other, Rena whispered, like they have a secret language that only daddies and their babies know. And I wonder, what does that feel like? The question hung in the air like a physical presence, demanding an answer Cass had never been able to give. For 6 years, she had worked 3 jobs, cleaning office buildings before dawn broke over the city, serving lunch to business people who barely acknowledged her existence, and stocking shelves at the 24-hour grocery store while most of the world slept. Every dollar earned, every sacrifice made, all to ensure Rena never felt the absence of what most children took for granted. But children, Cass had learned, felt everything with devastating clarity. "Dr. Martinez wants to talk to us later," Cass said, desperate to change the subject, to move away from the pain that lived in her daughter's eyes. "I know what he's going to say," Rena replied with that devastating matter-of-factness that had developed over the past few months. "I heard him talking to the nurses. He thinks I can't understand the big words, but I can." Cass's breath caught. "What did you hear, sweetheart?" "That my heart is too tired to keep working much longer, that the medicine isn't helping anymore, that maybe—" Rena's voice grew smaller. "Maybe it's time to say goodbye." The words hit Cass like a freight train. She had known this moment was coming. Dr. Martinez had been preparing her for weeks, but hearing it from her daughter's lips made it devastatingly real. "Rena, baby, it's okay, Mama." Rena reached out with a hand that seemed too small, too fragile, and touched her mother's face. "I'm not scared about dying, but I am scared about never knowing." Never knowing what? What it feels like to have a daddy love me. Just once. "Before I go, I want to know what that feels like." The tears Cass had been holding back finally spilled over, hot and relentless down her cheeks. 6 years of being strong, of being both mother and father, of telling herself that her love was enough. All of it crumbled in the face of her daughter's simple, heartbreaking wish. "I want someone to pick me up and spin me around and call me his little princess," Rena continued, her voice growing weaker. "I want to know what it's like when a daddy looks at you like you're the most important thing in the whole world. Just once, Mama, before my heart stops working forever." Cass buried her face in her hands, sobs racking her body. How could she explain to a dying child that the man who was supposed to love her had chosen to walk away instead? How could she make Rena understand that some hearts were capable of abandoning what they should cherish most? When she finally looked up, Rena was watching her with those wise, too-old eyes. "Maybe," Rena said softly, "maybe there's someone out there who could pretend, just for a little while, just so I can know." The idea was insane, impossible, desperate beyond reason. But as Cass sat there, watching her daughter fade away a little more each day, desperation began to feel like the only option left. 2 hours later, Dr. Martinez delivered the devastating news Cass had been dreading for weeks. Rena's latest cardiac tests showed critical deterioration. They were looking at days, not weeks. The experimental treatments had failed, and conventional medicine had reached its limits. "I'm sorry, doctor," Martinez said, his kind eyes filled with genuine regret. "At this point, we're discussing comfort care rather than curative options." The words hit Cass like a physical blow, even though she'd seen this moment approaching for weeks. Still, hearing it spoken aloud made it devastatingly real. The early evening air was crisp, carrying the scent of approaching rain. People moved past her in all directions, visitors leaving after their daily hospital calls, medical staff changing shifts, delivery personnel bustling about their business. All of them living their normal lives while hers fell apart, one heartbeat at a time. That's when she saw him. Darren Woods stood near the valet station, checking his phone while waiting for his car. Even from a distance, everything about him spoke of success and privilege. The tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than Cass made in 6 months, the confident way he carried himself, the expensive watch catching the light as he lifted his hand. He was perfect, too perfect. The kind of man who looked like he could be someone's father, someone's hero, someone's whole world. Before her rational mind could stop her, Cass was walking toward him, her feet moving of their own accord. Each step brought her closer to either salvation or humiliation, but she no longer cared about the difference. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice cracking with emotion. Darren looked up from his phone, his green eyes meeting hers with polite curiosity. Up close, he was even more striking. Strong jaw, kind eyes, the sort of face that belonged in boardrooms and magazine covers. "Yes," he said, his voice warm and professionally courteous. Cass opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again. How did someone ask a complete stranger to pretend to be their dying child's father? How did someone explain 6 years of heartbreak in a single conversation? She began, then stopped, tears already threatening again. But then she thought of Rena, lying in that hospital bed, dreaming of a love she would never know. And suddenly, the words came pouring out. "Will you be the father of my daughter for just one day? She's close to death," Cass whispered, her voice trembling as tears streamed down her face. Her hands reached out instinctively, clutching at his coat like it was her last hope in a world that had already taken everything else. Chapter 2. The Stranger's Heart. Darren Woods had built his empire on reading people, understanding their motivations, predicting their moves, recognizing desperation, manipulation, and genuine need within seconds of meeting someone. But standing in the hospital's valet area, looking into the tear-stained face of this stranger who had just made the most impossible request he'd ever heard, every instinct he'd honed over 15 years in business screamed conflicting messages. "Walk away. This is insane. This is dangerous. Stay. This is real. This matters." "I'm sorry," Cass said quickly, seeing his shocked expression, her hands dropping from his coat as if she'd been burned. "I'm sorry, that was insane. I don't know what I was thinking. Please just forget Wait," Darren said, his voice coming out rougher than intended. "What did you say?" Cass wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving streaks of mascara across her brown skin. Even disheveled and crying, she was stunning, the kind of natural beauty that didn't need enhancement, that came from strength and grace, rather than artifice. "My daughter," she whispered, her voice breaking. "She's 6 years old and she's dying, and she's never had a father. Her biological father left when she was 2 days old. 2 days. And now she's in there asking me what it feels like to be loved by a daddy, and I don't know how to answer her because I can't give her that." Darren felt something shift in his chest, a crack in the carefully constructed walls he'd built around his heart. He'd been raised by parents who viewed children as accessories to success rather than human beings to be cherished. The idea of a father abandoning his 2-day-old daughter was so foreign, so incomprehensible, that it made him physically angry. "She doesn't have long," Cass continued, the words tumbling out now as if a dam had burst. "Days, maybe a week. And all she wants is to know what it feels like to have someone call her their little girl, to feel protected and cherished by a man who chose to love her, just once. Before she couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Darren studied her face, looking for signs of deception, manipulation, the thousand small tells that usually accompanied elaborate cons. He'd been approached by gold diggers and con artists more times than he could count, each with their own tragic story designed to separate him from his wealth. He'd learned to spot the tells, the calculated tears, the rehearsed desperation, the subtle assessments of his worth. But this woman wasn't cataloging his expensive watch or mentally calculating his net worth. She was drowning, and her desperation was so raw, so genuine, that it reached past every defense he'd built and grabbed something in his chest he'd thought was dead. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. Cass Furness. And my daughter is Rena. She said the name like a prayer, like it was the most precious word in any language. Darren Woods, he replied automatically, then immediately regretted it. Now she would know exactly who he was, would be able to research his wealth, but Cass's expression didn't change. She wasn't connecting the name to the headlines, wasn't calculating opportunity. She was just a mother, desperate and broken, asking a stranger to give her daughter one perfect moment before the world took her away forever. I know this is crazy, Cass said, misreading his silence as rejection. I know you probably think I'm some kind of lunatic or criminal or— How long? Darren interrupted. What? How long would you need me to pretend? Hope flickered in her eyes like a candle flame in wind. Just a few hours, maybe one afternoon. Long enough for her to experience it, to have that memory. I'm not asking for money or anything else, I swear. Just let her feel loved. Let her call you daddy and mean it, even if it's only pretend. Darren's phone buzzed in his hand, probably his assistant wondering where he was, or his driver waiting for instructions. His carefully scheduled evening was waiting for him. Dinner at an exclusive restaurant, review of quarterly reports, preparation for tomorrow's board meeting. His life of predictable luxury and isolated success. All of it seemed suddenly, overwhelmingly empty. Which room? He heard himself ask. Cass's eyes widened. You'll do it? Which room is she in? Pediatric ICU, room 314. But are you sure? I mean, I don't even know you, and you don't know us, and— Neither of us knows what we're doing, Darren said, surprised by his own certainty. But your daughter deserves to feel loved, and if I can give her that— He trailed off, not sure how to finish the thought. The truth was more complex than he could easily explain. His childhood had been spent in expensive boarding schools and summer camps, cared for by a succession of nannies and tutors while his parents built their empire. He'd learned early that love was conditional, temporary, something that had to be earned through achievement rather than simply given. But watching this woman pour out her heart for a dying child, seeing the fierce protective love that drove her to approach a complete stranger with an impossible request, it awakened something in him that felt like recognition. This was what real love looked like. This was what he'd been missing his entire life without even knowing it. Thank you, Cass whispered, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. Thank you so much. I don't know how to repay— Don't, Darren said firmly. This isn't about repayment. This is about a little girl who deserves better than what life has given her. They walked back into the hospital together, an unlikely pair, the billionaire in his $1,000 suit, and the struggling single mother in her worn jeans and faded sweater. The elevator ride to the third floor was silent, filled with nervous energy and the weight of what they were about to attempt. She might be suspicious at first, Cass warned as they approached room 314. She's smart, and she's been disappointed before. She might not believe— The words died in her throat as they reached the doorway. Through the glass panel, they could see Rena sitting up in bed, staring out the window at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the darkness. Even from this distance, even with tubes and wires surrounding her, she was beautiful. Delicate features, skin the color of café au lait, her mother's expressive eyes in a face that held too much sadness for someone so young. Oh, Darren breathed, and something fundamental shifted inside his chest. He'd expected to feel sympathy, maybe some satisfaction at doing a good deed. He hadn't expected to feel like he'd been punched in the solar plexus, like every protective instinct he'd never known he possessed had suddenly roared to life. Rena turned at the sound of their footsteps, her gaze moving from her mother to the stranger beside her. For a moment she just stared, taking in Darren's appearance with the careful assessment children used when meeting new adults. Then Cass stepped forward, her voice gentle but clear. "Rena, sweetheart, I want you to meet someone very special. This is... this is your daddy." The word hung in the air like a held breath. Rena's eyes widened, moving between her mother and Darren with an expression that cycled through confusion, hope, and heartbreaking wariness. "My daddy," she whispered, the word coming out like she wasn't sure she was allowed to say it. Darren found himself moving forward without conscious thought, drawn by an invisible thread to this tiny person who was looking at him like he might be either salvation or another disappointment in a life that had already delivered too many. "Hello, princess," he said, the endearment coming naturally, despite the fact that he'd never called anyone that before in his life. And then, as if she'd been waiting her entire 6 years for this moment, Rena's face lit up like sunrise after the longest night. She opened her thin arms and said the word that would change everything. "Daddy." When Darren bent down and carefully gathered her into his arms, feeling her tiny heartbeat against his chest, breathing in the scent of hospital soap and strawberry shampoo, he knew with absolute certainty that this was no longer pretend. This was real. This was his daughter, and he would move heaven and earth to keep her safe. Chapter 3. Unexpected Connections. "Tell me about space, Daddy." The request came 3 hours after Darren had first held Rena in his arms, and he was still reeling from how naturally the word "daddy" fell from her lips, how it sent warmth flooding through his chest every time she said it. They were settled in the uncomfortable hospital chair beside her bed, Rena curled against his side like she'd been doing it her whole life, her small hand resting trustingly on his chest. "Space," Darren repeated, glancing over at Cass, who was watching them with an expression he couldn't quite read, wonder mixed with something that might have been fear. "Mama says that's where the angels live," Rena explained, her voice still weak but more animated than it had been all day. "And she says when people die, they become stars so they can watch over the people they love. I want to know about the stars I'm going to become." The casual way she discussed her own death made Darren's throat tight. He'd known she was sick, but somehow he hadn't fully grasped that this brilliant, beautiful child was actually dying. The reality of it hit him like a physical blow. "Well," he said, his voice rougher than intended, "space is infinite. That means it goes on forever and ever, with no end. And there are billions of stars, each one unique and special and absolutely irreplaceable." Rena tilted her head to look up at him. "Like people. Exactly like people. And some stars shine so brightly that they light up everything around them. Those are the special ones, the ones that make other stars feel less alone in all that darkness. Is that the kind of star I'll be?" Darren felt Cass's sharp intake of breath from across the room. When he met her eyes, he saw tears threatening to spill over, saw her biting her lip to keep from crying in front of her daughter. "You already are that kind of star, princess," Darren said, meaning every word. "You've been lighting up this whole hospital since the moment I met you." Rena giggled, actually giggled, and the sound was so pure and joyful that it made Darren's chest ache. "Daddy, you're funny." "Am I? I usually think I'm quite serious." "That's what makes it funny," Rena said with the devastating logic that only children possessed. "Serious people saying funny things is the best kind of funny." Over the next hour, Darren discovered that Rena possessed a rare combination of innocence and insight that both broke his heart and filled him with wonder. She asked about his work with genuine curiosity, listening as he explained that he built companies to help people, then surprised him by suggesting solutions to problems his expensive consultants had been wrestling with for months. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "if you really want to help people, maybe you should help the people who help people too. Like Mama, she works really hard helping others, but nobody takes care of her." The observation hit Darren squarely in the chest. He glanced at Cass, who was pretending to organize Rena's belongings while obviously listening to every word of their conversation. Her clothes were clean but worn, her shoes practical but scuffed, her entire appearance speaking of someone who prioritized her child's needs over her own without question. "What kind of work does Mama do?" Darren asked Rena, though he was really asking Cass. "She cleans big buildings when it's still dark outside," Rena explained with obvious pride. "Then she serves lunch to busy people, and at night she organizes all the things at the grocery store. She says work is how we show love. She works for me, and someday when I'm better, I'll work to help people too." The casual mention of "when I'm better" rather than "if" made Darren's chest tight with a mixture of hope and protective determination. This child's unwavering faith in her future gave him something to fight for. "Someday when you're big," Darren repeated, his voice firm. "That's right." For the first time since entering this room, he allowed himself to really look at the medical equipment surrounding Rena's bed, to consider what it meant and what options might exist. He'd built his fortune by identifying problems and creating solutions, by refusing to accept that anything was impossible if you had enough resources and determination. A dying 6-year-old was just another problem to solve. "Rena," he said carefully, "how would you feel about getting a second opinion on your heart?" The little girl looked confused. "What's a second opinion?" "It's when we ask another doctor to look at you, just to make sure the first doctor didn't miss anything." "But Dr. Martinez is really smart," Rena protested loyally. "He knows all about hearts." "I'm sure he does. But sometimes even really smart people benefit from working with other really smart people." From across the room, Cass spoke for the first time in an hour. "Mr. Woods, that's very kind, but we can't afford—" "I'm not asking you to afford anything," Darren interrupted gently. "I'm asking if you'd let me make some phone calls." Cass moved closer to the bed, her expression wary. "Why would you do that? You don't even know us." It was a fair question, and one Darren wasn't sure he could answer honestly. The truth was he'd known this woman and her daughter for less than 4 hours, but something about them had awakened every protective instinct he'd never known he possessed. Rena's courage in the face of death, Cass's fierce devotion despite overwhelming odds. They represented something pure and real in a world where he'd grown accustomed to artifice and manipulation. "Because," he said simply, "that's what fathers do. We protect our daughters." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with implications none of them were quite ready to examine. Cass's eyes widened, and she opened her mouth as if to protest, to remind him that this was supposed to be temporary, pretend, a brief gift to a dying child. But then Rena spoke up, her voice soft but certain. "He means it, Mama. I can tell." "How can you tell, sweetheart?" Cass asked, though her question was directed more at Darren than at her daughter. Rena shifted in Darren's arms, looking up at him with those two wise eyes. "Because when he looks at me, his eyes get the same way yours do, like I'm the most important thing in the whole world." The observation was so accurate, so perceptive, that it took Darren's breath away. She was right. Somewhere in the space of a few hours, this child had become the most important thing in his world. The realization should have terrified him, should have sent him running back to his safe, controlled life of boardrooms and profit margins. Instead, it felt like coming home. "Cass," he said quietly, using her name for the first time, "let me help. Please." She studied his face for a long moment, searching for something he hoped she would find. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she nodded slowly. "Okay," she whispered, "but I need you to understand. We can't pay you back. Ever. We don't have anything to offer except—" "You're offering me the chance to be someone's father," Darren said, the words coming from somewhere deep in his chest. "That's worth more than money." An hour later, as visiting hours came to an end and Rena finally drifted off to sleep, Darren found himself reluctant to leave. The little girl was curled on her side, one hand still clutching his fingers, her breathing steady despite the machines monitoring her every heartbeat. "She's never slept this peacefully in the hospital," Cass said softly, standing beside his chair. "Usually she has nightmares." "What kind of nightmares?" "Being alone, being forgotten." Cass's voice was barely a whisper. "She dreams that everyone leaves and she's the only person left in the world." The image was heartbreaking, and it explained so much about the way Rena had clung to him, the desperate hope in her eyes when she'd first called him Daddy. "I should go," Darren said reluctantly, gently extricating his fingers from Rena's grip. "But I'll be back tomorrow." "You don't have to." "Yes," he said firmly, standing to face her. "I do." They were standing close now, close enough that he could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the way she held herself like someone braced for the next blow. Close enough to notice that despite everything she'd been through, despite the stress and fear and sleepless nights, she was absolutely beautiful. "Thank you," she said simply. "Don't thank me yet," Darren replied. "Wait until you see what I can do." As he walked toward the elevator, he was already making mental lists of phone calls to make, specialists to contact, favors to call in. Somewhere in the vast network of his business contacts and medical connections, there had to be someone who could help Rena. Someone who could give her more than days or weeks. Someone who could give her a lifetime, because that's what fathers did. They moved heaven and earth for their daughters. Chapter 4. Building Trust. Darren arrived at the hospital the next morning carrying a bag containing 3 carefully chosen children's books, a stuffed elephant with impossibly soft gray fur, and most importantly, the business card of Dr. Elena Vasquez, one of the country's most renowned pediatric cardiologists who had agreed to review Rena's case. He'd spent the night making calls, leveraging relationships built over 15 years and calling in favors he'd been saving for emergencies. If this didn't qualify as an emergency, nothing ever would. What he hadn't expected was to find Cass asleep in the chair beside Rena's bed, her head tilted at an angle that would leave her neck aching for days, her hand still resting protectively on her daughter's arm. The morning light streaming through the window caught the exhaustion etched in her features, the way even in sleep she looked like someone braced for bad news. "She never left," a soft voice said behind him. Darren turned to find a nurse, Maria, according to her name tag, watching him with curious eyes. "She's been here all night?" "She's been here every night for the past 2 weeks," Maria replied quietly. "We've offered her the family sleeping room, but she won't leave Rena's side. Says she's afraid if she goes to sleep somewhere else, she might miss something important." Like her daughter's last words, Darren thought, his chest tightening, like the final moments of the most precious thing in her world. "Good morning, Daddy." Rena's cheerful voice made both adults turn toward the bed. The little girl was sitting up, looking more alert than she had yesterday, her eyes bright with the kind of excitement that only children could muster in the face of impossible circumstances. "Good morning, Princess," Darren said, moving to her bedside. "How are you feeling?" "Better. Mama says it's because I finally have a daddy to keep the nightmares away." Rena's matter-of-fact delivery of this observation made Darren's throat tight with emotion. The sound of their voices woke Cass, who startled awake with the reflexive alertness of someone accustomed to crisis. Her eyes immediately went to Rena, scanning for signs of distress, before landing on Darren with surprise. "You came back," she said, and the wonder in her voice suggested she hadn't really believed he would. "I told you I would." Darren set the bag down and pulled out the stuffed elephant. "This is for you, Rena. I thought you might like a friend to keep you company." Rena's eyes went wide as she accepted the elephant, hugging it against her chest with the fierce affection children reserved for their most treasured possessions. "He's perfect. What's his name?" "That's up to you. He's yours now." "Grayson," Rena said immediately. "His name is Grayson, and he's going to help me be brave." Darren felt something shift in his chest at the name choice, so mature, so thoughtful for a 6-year-old. "Grayson is a wonderful name." "Darren," Cass began, wariness creeping into her voice. "You really don't need to bring gifts. This isn't—" "It's about whatever I choose to make it about," Darren interrupted gently but firmly. "And I choose to make it about being her father, in every way that matters." The word landed between them like a declaration of war against everything that had tried to hurt this family. Cass's eyes widened, searching his face for signs of deception or temporary sentiment, but finding only steady resolve. But Rena spoke first. "Can we read together, Daddy?" "I love stories." "What kind of stories do you like?" Darren asked, settling into the chair beside her bed. "Adventure stories and fairy tales, but not the scary ones where people die at the end." Her voice carried the weight of someone who'd had enough real-life fear to last several lifetimes. Darren pulled out the first book, a collection of modern fairy tales with happy endings, and began to read. His voice, trained by years of boardroom presentations, was perfect for storytelling, and soon Rena was completely absorbed in the adventures of brave princesses and kind-hearted dragons. Cass watched from her chair, her expression cycling between gratitude and concern. Every kindness Darren showed her daughter, every gentle touch and patient answer, made this situation more complicated. This wasn't supposed to be real. This wasn't supposed to last. But watching them together, seeing the way Rena bloomed under his attention and the way Darren seemed to transform into someone softer and more human. When he looked at her daughter, Cass felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. "Cass," Darren said during a break between stories, "when was the last time you went home? Had a proper meal? Slept in a real bed?" "I'm fine," she said automatically, the response of someone who'd been managing alone for so long that accepting help felt foreign and dangerous. "You're exhausted," Darren replied matter-of-factly. "And Rena needs you to take care of yourself so you can take care of her." "Mama," Rena said suddenly, "you should listen to Daddy. He's very smart about taking care of people." "How do you know that?" Cass asked her daughter. "Because he took care of me yesterday when I was scared about the needles, and he took care of you by making your sad eyes happy again." The observation was so perceptive, so accurate, that both adults fell silent. It was true. For the first time in weeks, Cass had slept peacefully, had felt some of the crushing weight of responsibility lift from her shoulders. Not because her problems had been solved, but because for the first time since Adam had walked away, she wasn't carrying them alone. "Dr. Martinez wants to see us this afternoon," Cass said quietly, changing the subject. "He has the results from yesterday's tests." Darren nodded. "I'd like to be there if that's okay with you." "You would?" "Cass, I meant what I said yesterday, about being her father, about protecting her. That includes being present for the hard conversations." Cass studied his face, searching for signs of insincerity or hidden motives. She'd been disappointed by people before, not just Adam, but a string of friends and family members who'd promised support and then disappeared when things got difficult. Self-preservation demanded that she remain skeptical, that she protect herself and Rena from another abandonment. But looking at Darren now, seeing the way he held her daughter like she was made of spun glass and precious metals, Cass felt something she hadn't experienced in 6 years. Hope. "Okay," she said finally, "you can come with us." The afternoon meeting with Dr. Martinez was everything Cass had been dreading. The test results were worse than expected. Rena's heart function was declining rapidly, and the medications that had been keeping her stable were becoming less effective. "I'm sorry, doctor," Martinez said, his kind eyes filled with genuine regret. "At this point, we're looking at comfort care rather than curative treatment. I wish I had better news." Darren listened to the doctor's explanation with the focused intensity he usually reserved for hostile takeovers, asking detailed questions about treatment options, experimental procedures, anything that might change the prognosis. But Dr. Martinez's answers remained consistent. Rena's condition was too advanced, her heart too damaged, for any of the available treatments to be effective. "What about a transplant?" Darren asked finally. Dr. Martinez shook his head sadly. "She's not strong enough for the surgery, and her other organ systems are too compromised. I'm afraid that's not an option." "How long?" Cass whispered, the words barely audible. "Days, maybe a week if we're fortunate." The silence that followed felt like a physical presence in the room. Cass closed her eyes, fighting back tears, while Darren felt a rage so pure and fierce that it threatened to consume him. This brilliant, beautiful child who'd brought light into his life was being taken away, and all the money and power and connections in the world couldn't stop it. "Thank you, Doctor," Darren said finally, his voice carefully controlled. "We appreciate your honesty." After Dr. Martinez left, they sat in the small consultation room in heavy silence. Cass was crying now, quiet tears that spoke of exhaustion and grief, and the terrible knowledge that soon she would be alone again. "Cass," Darren said softly. "Don't," she whispered. "Please don't say it's going to be okay, or that everything happens for a reason, or any of the other things people say when they don't know what else to do." "I wasn't going to say any of those things," Darren replied. "I was going to say that you're not alone in this. Whatever happens, however long we have, you're not going through it alone anymore." Cass looked up at him through her tears. "Why? Why are you doing this? You don't owe us anything." "Because," Darren said, reaching out to take her hand, "in 2 days, you and Rena have given me something I didn't even know I was missing. You've made me feel like I matter for reasons that have nothing to do with money or success or power. You've made me feel like a father." Their hands were still joined when they walked back to Rena's room, and something had fundamentally shifted between them. What had started as a desperate stranger's plea had become something deeper, more complex. They were no longer just two people helping a dying child. They were becoming a family, fragile and new, and built on the foundation of shared love for a little girl who deserved so much more time than the world was willing to give her. But families, Darren was learning, weren't always about time. Sometimes they were about moments, perfect, precious moments that burned bright enough to illuminate the darkness ahead. Chapter 5. The Deepening Bond. 3 days after Dr. Martinez delivered his devastating prognosis, Darren walked into Rena's hospital room with the focused energy of a man who had spent every waking moment since then making impossible things possible. "Good morning, Princess," he said, his voice carefully controlled despite the urgency thrumming through his veins. Behind his calm exterior, he'd been working frantically. Private jets chartered, medical consultations arranged, specialists contacted across 3 time zones. Rena looked up from the coloring book she'd been working on with Cass, her face brightening in the way that had become as essential to Darren as breathing. "Daddy, look what Mama and I made." She held up a drawing of 3 stick figures holding hands, a tall man in a suit, a woman with curly hair, and a small girl with a crown. Above them, she'd colored a rainbow in careful, precise strokes, and underneath, in her careful 6-year-old handwriting, she'd written, "My family." The words hit Darren like a physical blow. 3 days ago, he'd been a successful but solitary man, whose greatest emotional attachment was to his quarterly profit reports. Now, looking at this simple drawing, he felt his entire world realign itself around this tiny person and her fierce, beautiful mother. "It's perfect," he said, his voice rougher than intended. "It's the most perfect thing I've ever seen." "You can have it," Rena said generously. "So when you go to work, you can remember that you have a family waiting for you." Cass looked up sharply at her daughter's words, her eyes finding Darren's with an expression that mixed hope and fear in equal measure. The reality was that this wasn't supposed to be permanent, wasn't supposed to be real. But somewhere in the space of 3 days, the lines between pretense and truth had blurred beyond recognition. "Rena," Darren said carefully, "how would you feel about taking a trip?" "A trip?" Rena's eyes lit up with the kind of excitement that children reserved for the most extraordinary possibilities. "Where?" "There's a hospital in Houston that specializes in hearts like yours. They have doctors there who might be able to help you in ways that the doctors here can't." Cass's head snapped up, her expression immediately wary. "Darren, we talked about this. Dr. Martinez was very clear." "Dr. Martinez is one doctor," Darren interrupted gently. "Dr. Elena Vasquez at Texas Children's Hospital is another. She's agreed to see Rena, to review her case, to explore options that might not be available here." "And how exactly are we supposed to get to Houston?" Cass asked, her voice tight with the frustration of someone who'd learned not to hope for things beyond her reach. "How are we supposed to afford specialists and second opinions and—" "You're not," Darren said simply. "I am." The silence that followed was loaded with implications none of them were quite ready to examine. Cass stood up from her chair, moving to the window, her back rigid with tension. "This isn't what we agreed to," she said quietly. "You said one day. You said just long enough for her to feel loved by a father. This is something else entirely." "Yes," Darren said, his voice steady. "It is." "Mama," Rena said softly, "what's wrong?" Cass turned back to face them, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Baby, Daddy is offering to do something very generous, but it's complicated. Hospitals and doctors cost a lot of money, and we can't—" "I'm not asking you to pay for anything," Darren said firmly. "I'm asking you to let me be her father in every way that matters, including making sure she gets the best possible care." "Why?" Cass whispered. "Why would you do this for strangers?" "Because you're not strangers," Darren replied, looking directly into her eyes. "Not anymore. Because when I look at Rena, I see my daughter. And when I look at you, I see—" He paused, the words catching in his throat. "What?" Cass asked, her voice barely audible. "I see someone I could love," he said simply. "Someone I think I already do love." The admission hung in the air between them like a bridge neither of them was quite brave enough to cross. Cass's eyes widened, her lips parting in surprise, while Rena looked between them with the kind of perceptive understanding that children possessed when it came to matters of the heart. "Do you love Mama too, Daddy?" Rena asked innocently. "Because she gets that same look in her eyes when she watches you." Both adults turned to stare at the little girl, who continued coloring as if she hadn't just articulated the truth that neither of them had been brave enough to speak aloud. "Rena," Cass began. "It's okay, Mama," Rena said matter-of-factly. "Love is good. Love makes people brave enough to do hard things." And suddenly, Cass understood. This wasn't about money or charity or temporary kindness. This was about a man who'd looked into the eyes of a dying child and found something worth fighting for. This was about a love that had grown in the space of days from nothing into something that felt essential, permanent, real. "The trip to Houston," she said finally. "What would that involve?" "A private jet to get us there quickly and comfortably," Darren replied, his voice carefully neutral as if he were discussing the weather rather than offering to spend what most people would consider a fortune. A consultation with Dr. Vasquez and her team, whatever tests or procedures they recommend, and if there's a treatment option available, pursuing it regardless of cost. And if there isn't, Cass asked quietly, then we bring her home, and we make sure every moment she has left is filled with love and joy and everything a little girl deserves. Cass closed her eyes, fighting a battle between hope and pragmatism that had been raging in her chest since the moment she'd first asked this stranger to pretend to be her daughter's father. Part of her wanted to protect herself and Rena from the inevitable disappointment, from the crushing return to reality when this fairy tale ended. But another part of her, the part that had watched her daughter bloom under Darren's attention, that had felt her own walls crumbling in the face of his genuine care, wanted to be brave enough to accept this gift. "Mama," Rena said softly, "can I tell you a secret?" Cass opened her eyes and moved back to her daughter's bedside. "Of course, sweetheart. I think maybe I'm not ready to become a star yet," Rena whispered. "I think maybe I want to stay here and be part of our family for a little longer." The words were so hopeful, so full of the kind of faith that only children possessed, that Cass felt her last defenses crumble entirely. How could she deny her daughter this chance, however remote, however impossible it might seem? "Okay," she said, looking up at Darren. "Okay, we'll go to Houston." The relief that flooded Darren's features was so profound that Cass realized how much this meant to him, how invested he'd become in fighting for Rena's life. This wasn't just about helping strangers anymore. This was about protecting his family. "There's one more thing," Darren said carefully. "Dr. Vasquez wants to see Rena as soon as possible. We need to leave tonight." "Tonight?" Cass felt a familiar surge of panic at how quickly her carefully controlled world was spinning beyond her grasp. "I know it's fast," Darren said, "but every day matters now. Every hour could make a difference." As if summoned by the urgency in his voice, Dr. Martinez appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but Rena's afternoon labs show some concerning changes. We need to discuss adjusting her medications." Darren stood immediately, moving to stand beside Cass as they faced the doctor together. The gesture was instinctive, protective, the behavior of a man claiming his place as father and partner without question. "What kind of changes?" Cass asked, her voice tight with fear. "Her heart function has declined more rapidly than we anticipated," Dr. Martinez replied gently. "I'm afraid we may be looking at hours rather than days." The words hit the room like a bomb blast, leaving destruction and silence in their wake. Cass felt her knees buckle, felt the world tilt dangerously on its axis, but before she could fall, Darren's arm was around her waist, steady and strong and absolutely unshakable. "Then we leave now," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos with absolute authority. "I'm getting them to Houston tonight." "Mr. Woods," Dr. Martinez began, "I understand your desire to help, but transporting a child in Rena's condition is going to happen whether it's risky or not," Darren interrupted, "because sitting here waiting for her to die isn't an option. Not for me. Not for us." As if to punctuate his words, Rena's monitors began beeping more rapidly, her small face growing pale as she struggled for breath. Nurses rushed into the room, adjusting medications and oxygen levels, their professional calm doing nothing to mask the urgency of the situation. And in that moment, as Cass watched her daughter fight for every breath, while the man she was falling in love with made phone calls to arrange the impossible, she understood that this was no longer about pretense or temporary comfort. This was about survival, about family, about love strong enough to move mountains, or at least strong enough to move heaven and earth to save one small girl who deserved so much more time than the world seemed willing to give her. Chapter 6. Challenges and Revelations. The private jet Darren had chartered was a marvel of luxury and medical equipment, with a full cardiac monitoring system and a flight nurse who specialized in pediatric critical care. As they soared through the night sky toward Houston, Rena slept peacefully for the first time in days, her small hand clutched in Darren's while her monitors showed stable readings. Cass sat across from them, torn between wonder and growing unease. Every kindness Darren showed Rena, every gentle gesture and patient answer, made their situation more complicated. What had begun as a desperate plea for one day of pretend fatherhood had evolved into something that felt permanent, real, essential. But with that reality came vulnerability she wasn't sure she was brave enough to embrace. "You need to sleep," Darren said softly, noticing the exhaustion etched in every line of her face. "I can't," Cass replied automatically. "What if something changes? What if she needs me and I'm not here?" The response revealed everything: her bone-deep terror of failing her daughter, the hypervigilance that had kept them both alive through 6 years of struggle, the inability to trust that someone else might share the weight of responsibility. "Then I'll wake you immediately," Darren promised. "But Cass, you haven't really slept in weeks. You're running on pure adrenaline and willpower, and that's not sustainable." She wanted to argue, to maintain the hypervigilance that had become second nature since Rena's diagnosis. But the combination of exhaustion and the first real hope she'd felt in months was overwhelming her defenses. "I don't understand why you're doing this," she said suddenly, the words coming out more sharply than she'd intended. "People they don't just adopt strangers' problems, especially not problems this big, this expensive, this hopeless." Darren was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing gentle patterns on Rena's small hand. "When I was Rena's age," he said finally, "I spent 6 weeks in the hospital with pneumonia. My parents visited exactly twice, once when I was admitted, once when I was discharged. They sent their assistant to handle everything in between." Cass felt her chest tighten at the pain hidden beneath his matter-of-fact delivery. "I used to watch the other kids with their families," Darren continued. "Parents who slept in uncomfortable chairs, who read the same story 50 times, who fought with doctors and insurance companies and anyone else who stood between them and their child's well-being. And I wondered what it would feel like to matter that much to someone. Darren, I'm 42 years old," he said, looking up to meet her eyes. "I've built companies, made fortunes, achieved everything I thought I wanted, but I've never felt as essential, as needed, as important as I have in the last 3 days watching you love your daughter." The admission hung between them, raw and honest, and more intimate than any physical touch. Cass felt tears prick her eyes, not just for the lonely child he'd been, but for the man who'd found his purpose in loving them. "You matter," she said softly. "To us, you matter more than you could possibly know." The call came at 2:47 a.m., jarring Cass from the first peaceful sleep she'd had in weeks. The number was blocked, but something, instinct or dread, made her answer. "Cass, it's Adam." 6 years of silence, and his voice was exactly the same. That particular combination of charm and selfishness that had once fooled her into thinking he was capable of love. Now it just made her blood run cold. "How did you get this number?" she asked, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Social media is a wonderful thing," Adam replied with casual cruelty, "especially when concerned friends start posting about medical fundraisers and private jets to Houston. Amazing how quickly word spreads when there's money involved." Cass's blood ran cold as she realized her mistake. In her desperation, she'd allowed friends from work to set up a crowdfunding page, not realizing it would create a digital trail that led directly back to them. The casual cruelty of his phrasing, "someone's kid," as if Rena wasn't his daughter, hit Cass like a physical blow. Darren's head snapped up at the mention of the name, his eyes immediately alert and protective. He'd heard enough about Rena's biological father to feel nothing but contempt for the man who'd abandoned them. I heard about Rena, Adam continued, his voice carrying what might have been concern if Cass were generous enough to interpret it that way. I saw something on social media about her being sick. Is it true? How did you get this number? Cass asked, her voice tight with anger she'd been carrying for 6 years. That doesn't matter. What matters is our daughter. Our daughter. Cass's voice rose, causing Rena to stir slightly in her sleep. She lowered her tone but lost none of her fury. You gave up the right to call her our anything when you walked out on a 2-day-old baby. I was young, Adam said, and Cass could hear the whining justification she remembered so well. I was scared. I made a mistake. A mistake. Cass could barely contain her rage. Abandoning your child isn't a mistake, Adam. It's a choice. A deliberate, conscious choice to prioritize your own comfort over your daughter's well-being. Darren reached out and took her free hand, his touch grounding her, reminding her that she wasn't alone in this anymore. I want to make it right, Adam continued. I want to be part of her life. I want to help. Help? Cass laughed bitterly. Where were you when she took her first steps, when she said her first word? Where were you during the sleepless nights when she had nightmares, or when she asked me why she didn't have a daddy like the other kids? I'm here now, Adam said, and there was something in his tone that made Cass's skin crawl. I'm ready to step up, to be her father. She already has a father, Cass said firmly, looking directly at Darren. She has a man who loves her, who protects her, who puts her needs before his own. Everything you never were and never will be. Who is he? Adam's voice took on an ugly edge. Some boyfriend you're using to replace me. Someone better than you in every possible way, Cass replied. Someone who chose to love her, who didn't need biology to make him step up and be a man. Look, Cass, I know you're angry, but I have rights. I'm her biological father, and if she's really as sick as people are saying, then maybe it's time for me to... Cass hung up the phone, her hands shaking with fury and something that might have been fear. After 6 years of silence, Adam's sudden interest in Rena felt calculated, opportunistic, and the mention of his rights made her stomach churn with dread. That was him, she said unnecessarily. I gathered, Darren replied, his voice carefully controlled. What did he want? To suddenly be a father, apparently, after 6 years of pretending we don't exist. Cass closed her eyes, fighting back the panic that threatened to overwhelm her. He mentioned his rights, Darren, his legal rights. He has no rights, Darren said firmly. He abandoned you. He's provided no support, financial or emotional. No court in the country would... He's her biological father, Cass interrupted. That means something legally, even if it means nothing morally. They sat in silence for several minutes, the only sounds the hum of the jet engines and Rena's steady breathing. Finally, Darren spoke. Cass, there's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you earlier. The seriousness in his tone made her stomach clench with dread. What? The medical expenses, the private jet, the consultation with Dr. Vasquez. It's not just charity. It's not just me trying to help strangers. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I want to adopt Rena legally. I want to marry you and become her father in every way that matters. The words hit Cass like a physical blow. What? I love her, Darren said simply. I love both of you. What started as pretense has become the most real thing in my life. I want to build a family with you, to give Rena everything she deserves, to protect both of you from people like Adam, who only show up when it's convenient for them. Cass stared at him, her mind reeling. Darren, we've known each other for 3 days. You can't just decide to marry someone and adopt their child based on 3 days. Why not? Darren asked. I've made business decisions worth millions based on less information and shorter timelines. This isn't about business. This is about love, about family, about doing whatever it takes to protect the people who matter most. But what if she doesn't get better? Cass whispered. What if Dr. Vasquez can't help her either? Would you still want to marry a woman whose daughter you'd only have for days or weeks? Darren leaned forward, his eyes intense and absolutely certain. Cass, I fell in love with Rena knowing she was dying. If all we get is days or weeks, then I want every moment of that time to be filled with love and security and the knowledge that she's cherished. I want her last memories to be of having a father who would move heaven and earth for her. And if she lives, if Dr. Vasquez finds a way to save her, then I want to spend the rest of my life being her father and your husband. The simple certainty in his voice took Cass's breath away. After 6 years of doing everything alone, of being both mother and father, of carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders, the idea of sharing that burden, of having a true partner, was almost too wonderful to believe. I'm scared, she admitted. Of what? Of believing this is real, of trusting that you won't disappear when things get difficult, of letting Rena get even more attached to you if... She couldn't finish the sentence. I'm not going anywhere, Darren said firmly. Not ever. Whether Rena lives or dies, whether you marry me or not, I'm not walking away from this family. You're stuck with me. As if summoned by their conversation, Rena stirred awake, her eyes opening to find both adults watching her with expressions of fierce love and protection. Are we almost there, Daddy? She asked sleepily. Almost, Princess, Darren replied, smoothing her hair back from her forehead. Just a little while longer. Good, Rena said, snuggling closer to him. I had the best dream. I dreamed that we were a real family forever and ever, and nobody could take us apart. Looking at her daughter's peaceful expression, at the man who'd become essential to both their lives in the space of days, Cass felt something she'd thought was lost forever, the belief that dreams could come true, even if nightmares sometimes came calling first. Chapter 7. The past confronts the present. Texas Children's Hospital in Houston was a gleaming testament to hope and cutting-edge medicine, its walls lined with artwork created by young patients and photographs of children who'd beaten the odds. Dr. Elena Vasquez met them in the pediatric cardiac wing, her reputation preceding her like a beacon of possibility in the darkness that had surrounded Rena's diagnosis. She's beautiful, Dr. Vasquez said after her initial examination, her kind eyes studying Rena with the intensity of someone who saw miracles as daily possibilities rather than distant dreams, and stronger than her test results suggest. They were gathered in her office, Cass clutching Darren's hand like a lifeline, Rena curled in Darren's lap wearing a hospital gown decorated with cartoon hearts, and Dr. Vasquez reviewing the comprehensive tests her team had conducted over the past 18 hours. The damage to her heart is significant, Dr. Vasquez continued, but there's an experimental procedure we've been developing. It's risky, requiring multiple surgeries over several months, and the success rate is... She paused, choosing her words carefully. Limited. How limited? Darren asked, his voice steady despite the way his arms tightened protectively around Rena. 10% survival rate, Dr. Vasquez replied with the honesty that made her one of the most respected physicians in her field. But for children in Rena's condition, it represents the only real hope available. The number settled over them like a weight, but Rena surprised them all by nodding thoughtfully. 10% is better than 0%, she said with startling pragmatism, and I'm pretty good at doing impossible things. Her matter-of-fact assessment of her own chances would have been heartbreaking if not for the quiet confidence in her voice. This was a child who had spent her entire life beating odds, and she had no intention of stopping now. 3 separate surgeries, each one complex and dangerous. Months of recovery between procedures. The possibility of complications that could... Dr. Vasquez glanced at Rena, who was listening with the attention of someone far older than her 6 years. The possibility of making things worse rather than better. But also the possibility of making me all better, Rena asked with the straightforward logic that only children possessed. Yes, sweetheart, Dr. Vasquez replied gently. Also that possibility. Rena considered this information with the seriousness of a board member reviewing a critical decision. Daddy, what do you think? The question stopped Darren's breath. 3 days ago, he'd been a stranger. Now, a dying child was asking him to help make the most important decision of her short life. I think, he said carefully, that 10% is 10% more than we had yesterday. And I think you're the bravest person I know, which means if anyone can beat those odds, it's you. And if I don't beat them, Rena asked with devastating matter-of-factness, then we'll have tried everything possible, and you'll know that everyone who loves you fought as hard as they could to keep you here. Rena nodded solemnly, then turned to her mother. Mama, are you brave enough to let me try? The question shattered Cass's heart into a million pieces. How could she say yes to subjecting her daughter to months of agony for a 10% chance? How could she say no to the only hope they had? I'm brave enough for anything when it comes to you, Cass whispered. Then we try, Rena said decisively. We try to beat the 10%. Dr. Vasquez smiled, the expression transforming her serious face into something radiant. In that case, we need to move quickly. I'd like to schedule the first surgery for next week, which means... A commotion in the hallway interrupted her words. Raised voices, someone arguing with hospital security, the sound of conflict that made every protective instinct in Darren's body flare to life. I'm her biological father, a familiar voice shouted. I have legal rights to see my daughter, and your security can't stop me. Cass went rigid in her chair, her face draining of color. Number he followed us here. Adam Barnhart appeared in the doorway before security could escort him out, flanked by a man in an expensive suit who was clearly his attorney. Adam looked exactly as Cass remembered, handsome in a shallow way, with the kind of confidence that came from never being truly held accountable for his actions. Hello, Cass, Adam said, his tone sickeningly sweet. Thanks for making it so easy to track you down. Social media posts about miracle surgeries in Houston really narrowed down the search. Hello, Cass, Adam said, his tone sickeningly sweet. I see you got my message. Get out, Cass said, standing so quickly her chair toppled backward. Get out right now. I'm afraid I can't do that, Adam replied, his eyes moving to Rena with what he probably thought looked like paternal concern. I'm here to see my daughter. Your daughter? Darren's voice was deadly quiet as he stood, moving slightly in front of Rena in an instinctively protective gesture. Your daughter is the child you abandoned 6 years ago. Adam's eyes narrowed as he took in Darren's expensive clothes, confident bearing, and protective stance. And you are? I'm her father, Darren replied simply. No, Adam said, his voice taking on an ugly edge. You're not. I am. Biologically, legally, I am her father, and I'm here to claim my rights. Adam's eyes moved around the expensive private room, cataloging details with the calculating assessment of someone evaluating potential profit. The luxury, the private specialists, the obvious wealth backing Rena's care, it all added up to opportunity in his mind. I've done my research on your new friend here, Adam said, his gaze settling on Darren with undisguised avarice. Darren Woods, net worth somewhere north of 50 million, recently divorced, no children of his own. Playing daddy to a dying kid must make him feel very noble. The words were designed to wound, to suggest that Darren's love for Rena was nothing more than a wealthy man's charity project. But they revealed more about Adam's character than they did about Darren's motivations. The mercenary calculation in his tone made Darren's hands clench into fists. "You mean it's time you started looking for a way to profit from her illness?" "I don't know what you're implying," Adam said with false innocence, "but I'm simply a concerned father who wants to be involved in his daughter's care." "Concerned father?" Cass's voice was shaking with fury. "You've been gone for 6 years. 6 years without a phone call, a birthday card, a single dollar in child support. You don't get to show up now and play concerned father." "People change," Adam said sanctimoniously. "I've grown up, taken responsibility for my mistakes. I want to be part of Rena's life." "No." The small voice from the hospital bed cut through all the adult posturing like a knife. Everyone turned to look at Rena, who was sitting up straight, her young face set with determination. "No, you can't be my father." Adam's expression faltered slightly. "Sweetheart, I know this is confusing, but I'm your real daddy. This man is just—" "He's my real daddy," Rena interrupted, pointing at Darren. "You're just the man who made me but didn't want me." The words hit Adam like a slap, his face flushing with anger and embarrassment. "You don't understand the situation, Rena. You're too young to make these kinds of decisions." "I'm old enough to know who loves me," Rena replied with devastating simplicity. "And I'm old enough to know who left me." Dr. Vasquez, who had been watching this confrontation with growing alarm, stepped forward. "I'm going to have to ask everyone to lower their voices. This is a hospital, and Rena needs to remain calm before her surgery." "Surgery?" Adam's lawyer immediately perked up. "What surgery? We weren't informed of any planned procedures." "Because you have no right to be informed," Cass snapped. "You abandoned your parental rights when you walked away." "That's not how the law works," the lawyer replied smoothly. "Mr. Barnhart's parental rights were never legally terminated. He has every right to be consulted on medical decisions for his biological daughter." "Then we'll terminate them now," Darren said, his voice cutting through the chaos with absolute authority. "I'm adopting Rena, and I'll fight anyone who tries to stop that." Adam laughed, the sound cold and calculating. "You can't adopt a child without both biological parents' consent, and I'm not consenting to anything until I understand exactly what kind of financial arrangements are being made for my daughter's care." The truth was finally out in the open. Adam wasn't here out of love or concern for Rena. He was here because he'd somehow learned about Darren's wealth and saw an opportunity to profit from the daughter he'd abandoned. "You want money?" Darren asked quietly. "I want what's best for my daughter," Adam replied, but his eyes were calculating. "And I think her biological father should have some say in how her medical care is funded." "Daddy," Rena said softly, her small voice cutting through the tension, "make the bad man go away." The simple request, delivered with absolute trust in Darren's ability to protect her, galvanized everyone in the room. Cass felt her love for this man deepen even further as she watched him step fully into the role of protector and father. "Security," Darren said, pulling out his phone. "And my attorney. Now." As he made his calls, Adam and his lawyer exchanged glances that spoke of plans and strategies and legal maneuvers designed to extract maximum profit from a dying child's desperate situation. But they had underestimated two things: the fierce, protective love of a mother who'd fought alone for 6 years, and the unlimited resources of a man who'd found his purpose in protecting this small family. The war for Rena's future was about to begin, but Adam Barnhart had no idea what kind of opponent he'd chosen to face. Darren Woods hadn't built an empire by accepting defeat, and he certainly wasn't going to start when it came to protecting his daughter. Chapter 8. Love in Crisis. The next 72 hours became a blur of legal consultations, medical preparations, and emotional warfare as Adam Barnhart and his attorney launched an aggressive campaign to gain control of Rena's medical decisions and access to the fortune being spent on her care. But Darren's legal team, led by the formidable Margaret Chen, proved to be more than a match for Adam's opportunistic maneuvering. "He's overplayed his hand," Margaret explained during an emergency meeting in a conference room overlooking the Houston skyline. Abandoning a child for 6 years without any support or contact, then suddenly appearing only when expensive medical care is involved? No judge with half a brain will see this as anything other than a transparent money grab. Cass sat beside Darren, her hand intertwined with his, drawing strength from his steady presence as they navigated the legal maze that threatened to delay Rena's surgery. "But he is her biological father," she said quietly. "That has to count for something legally." "It counts for very little when weighed against abandonment and his obvious mercenary motives," Margaret replied firmly. "Especially when we have a man willing to legally adopt her and take full financial responsibility for her care." Through the conference room's glass walls, they could see Rena in her hospital room, playing quietly with Grace and the elephant while nurses monitored her increasingly fragile condition. Every hour of legal delay was an hour her small heart grew weaker, an hour closer to the point where even the experimental surgery might not be an option. "How long?" Darren asked, his voice tight with controlled urgency. "I can have emergency custody orders blocked within 24 hours, Margaret promised, "and I can expedite the adoption paperwork, but even with emergency filings, we're looking at 48 to 72 hours minimum. That's if everything goes perfectly and Adam doesn't challenge." "We don't have 72 hours, Darren said urgently. "Rena's surgery is scheduled for tomorrow morning." "Then we need the nuclear option," Margaret replied grimly. "Emergency marriage with immediate step-parent adoption filing. It's legally bulletproof, but it means making a permanent decision under crisis circumstances." Darren looked at Cass, his green eyes reflecting the same mixture of love and determination she felt burning in her own chest. "We're certain," he said without hesitation. "There's one more thing," Margaret continued, her expression growing serious. "The fastest way to resolve this completely is if you two are married. Step-parent adoption with spousal consent carries much more legal weight than a single man trying to adopt a child whose biological father is contesting." "Married?" Cass felt the word stick in her throat, not from reluctance but from the sheer impossibility that something so wonderful could happen in the middle of their nightmare. "It would eliminate Adam's legal standing entirely," Margaret explained practically. "Step-parent adoption with spousal consent, combined with documented abandonment, creates an unassailable legal position. More importantly, it would give both of you immediate medical decision-making authority." Darren turned to face Cass fully, taking her hands in his. The weight of what he was about to ask, what they were about to do, settled between them like a bridge spanning an impossible chasm. "I know this seems insane," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know we've only known each other for a week, and that normal people don't fall in love during medical crises. But there's nothing normal about what we've been through together. When you watch someone fight for their child's life, when you see them make impossible sacrifices with absolute grace, you see who they really are." Cass felt tears streaming down her face as his words washed over her. "Darren, let me finish," he said gently, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "I've seen your strength, your courage, your heart. I've seen how you love, completely, fiercely, without reservation. I've watched you carry the weight of the world on your shoulders and still find ways to make your daughter smile. I've seen you choose hope when despair would have been easier, choose trust when betrayal was all you'd ever known." "You don't know everything about me," Cass whispered, her voice breaking. "You don't know how scared I am, how many times I've failed her, how many nights I've lain awake wondering if I'm enough. I know enough, Darren replied firmly. I know that you've been enough for 6 years, all by yourself. I know that you're the strongest person I've ever met, and the most beautiful, and the most deserving of love. And I know that I want to spend the rest of my life being worthy of that kind of love, worthy of being Rena's father, worthy of being your husband. The word hung between them, husband, loaded with promises and possibilities, and the terrifying beauty of choosing love in the face of loss. What if she doesn't make it? Cass asked, voicing the fear that lived in both their hearts. What if we do this, we make this commitment, and then we lose her? What if you wake up married to a woman whose daughter you only knew for a week? Darren's eyes never left hers as he answered, Then I'll wake up married to the woman who showed me what love really means, the woman who taught me that some things are worth fighting for, no matter how impossible they seem, the woman who made me a father, even if only for a week. And if she lives, Cass whispered, then we get to spend the rest of our lives watching her grow up, celebrating every milestone, arguing about curfews and college choices and wedding plans. We get to be her parents together for as long as we're blessed to have her. Cass closed her eyes, feeling the last of her defenses crumble. After 6 years of protecting herself and Rena from disappointment, from abandonment, from the kind of hope that could destroy them if it proved false, she was choosing to be brave enough to believe in this impossible love. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. Cass felt her chest tighten with a mixture of fear and hope that threatened to overwhelm her. She looked at Darren, this man who'd appeared in their lives like a miracle and somehow become essential to their survival, and saw her own emotions reflected in his eyes. Cass, he said softly, turning to face her fully, this isn't how I imagined proposing to you. You were planning to propose? The question came out breathless, amazed. I've been planning to propose since the moment I realized I loved you, Darren replied simply. I just thought we'd have more time, more normal circumstances. But if Rena has taught me anything, it's that love doesn't wait for perfect timing. Tears spilled down Cass's cheeks as she looked at this man who'd fought for her daughter, who'd become the father Rena had always deserved, who'd somehow made her believe in fairy tales again, despite the nightmare they were living through. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. Margaret smiled, the expression transforming her serious face. In that case, I know a judge who can perform the ceremony today. We can have it done right here in the hospital, with Rena as your witness. 2 hours later, in the small chapel attached to Texas Children's Hospital, Cass Furness became Cass Woods in a ceremony that was simultaneously the most unconventional and most perfect wedding imaginable. The chapel itself was simple but beautiful, with stained glass windows that cast rainbow patterns across polished wooden pews. Fresh flowers from the hospital's garden center had been hastily arranged into bouquets, and someone had found battery-operated candles to create a warm, intimate glow despite the fluorescent hospital lighting. Cass wore a simple navy blue dress that Darren had somehow managed to have delivered within hours, the fabric soft and elegant against her skin. It wasn't the wedding dress she'd dreamed of as a little girl, but it was perfect for this moment, for this man, for this impossible love story they were writing together. Darren stood beside her in a fresh white shirt and charcoal slacks, his expensive suit jacket abandoned in favor of clothes that felt more like himself, less like the billionaire businessman, and more like the man who'd fallen in love with a dying child and her fierce mother. Rena sat in her wheelchair between them, wearing a flower crown made from white daisies and baby's breath that a kind nurse had woven together. She held 2 simple gold bands in her small hands, wedding rings from the hospital gift shop that cost $30, but felt more precious than any diamond. Do you, Darren James Woods, take Cassandra Marie Furness to be your wife to love and cherish in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for as long as you both shall live. I do, Darren said, his voice steady and sure as he looked into Cass's eyes. I do, and I promise to love not just you, but the beautiful daughter you're trusting me to protect. I promise to be the father she deserves and the husband you've always been worth waiting for. Do you, Cassandra Marie Furness, take Darren James Woods to be your husband, to love and cherish in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for as long as you both shall live? I do, Cass whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. I do, and I promise to love you for seeing us when we were invisible, for choosing us when we had nothing to offer but hope, for making us believe in happy endings again. As Darren slipped the simple gold band onto her finger, Cass felt something shift inside her chest, not just the joy of marrying the man she loved, but the profound relief of no longer carrying the weight of the world alone. For the first time in 6 years, she had a true partner, someone who would share both the burdens and the blessings of loving Rena. By the power vested in me by the state of Texas, I now pronounce you husband and wife. The kiss that sealed their marriage was gentle, tender, and full of promises for a future they were both determined to fight for. When they broke apart, Rena was clapping her hands with pure joy, her laughter filling the small chapel with music more beautiful than any wedding march. Now I really have a daddy forever, she said with satisfaction. Even if the bad man tries to take me away, I have a real family now. Later that evening, after the legal papers had been signed and Rena had fallen asleep, clutching both their hands, Cass and Darren found themselves alone in the small family room adjacent to the pediatric ward. The reality of what they'd done was beginning to sink in. They were married, legally bound together in the midst of the greatest crisis of their lives. Mrs. Woods, Darren said softly, testing how the name sounded. Mr. Woods, Cass replied, a small smile playing at her lips despite the exhaustion that seemed to seep into her bones. That's going to take some getting used to. They sat together on the uncomfortable hospital couch, hands intertwined, wedding rings catching the fluorescent light. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was the quiet of two people processing a monumental shift in their lives. Are you scared? Cass asked finally. Terrified, Darren admitted, but not of marrying you. I'm scared of not being the father she needs, the husband you deserve. I'm scared of failing the two most important people in my world. Cass turned to study his profile, this man who'd appeared in their lives like a guardian angel and somehow become their anchor in the storm. You've already proven yourself, Darren. Every day since we met, you've shown up. You've fought for her, for us. That's what family does. I've never been anyone's family before, he said quietly. Not really. My parents loved me in their way, but it was conditional, measured. This, what I feel for you and Rena, it's completely different. It's consuming and terrifying and absolutely essential all at once. Good, Cass said firmly. Because that's exactly how love is supposed to feel. Tomorrow would bring the surgery, the 10% chance, the possibility that their new family might be shattered before it had a chance to truly begin. But tonight, in this quiet moment between wedding and crisis, they were just a husband and wife, holding each other and holding hope. But Adam's legal challenge was already crumbling. Within hours of the wedding, Margaret received word that he was dropping his custody petition in exchange for a financial settlement that Darren agreed to with the contempt it deserved. Enough money to go away permanently, but not enough to live comfortably on for long. He'll be back, Cass warned as they signed the final papers that terminated Adam's parental rights forever. Let him come, Darren replied firmly. He'll find that married couples with unlimited legal resources are much harder targets than desperate single mothers. The legal crisis resolved, they could finally focus on what mattered most. Rena's surgery, scheduled for the following morning. Dr. Vasquez had assembled her team, the experimental procedure had been planned down to the smallest detail, and the 10% chance of success loomed before them like a mountain they had to climb together. That night, as they sat in Rena's hospital room watching her sleep, Cass found herself thinking about how much had changed in the space of a week. She was married to a man she'd known for 6 days. He was legally her daughter's father, and tomorrow they would either begin the long journey toward healing or say goodbye to the most precious thing in their world. "Are you scared?" she asked Darren quietly. "Terrified," he admitted, "but not of the surgery failing. I'm scared of not being brave enough to deserve the trust she's placed in me." Cass reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "She chose you," she said simply. "Before any of us really understood what was happening, she chose you to be her father. That means something. What if I'm not enough?" The vulnerability in his voice reminded her that beneath the confidence and resources, he was just a man who'd never been a father before, trying to protect a child who meant everything to him. "You are enough," Cass said firmly. "You're more than enough. You're exactly what she needs, what we both need." As if summoned by their whispered conversation, Rena stirred awake, her eyes opening to find both her parents watching over her with expressions of fierce love and protection. "Mama, Daddy," she said sleepily, "are you worried about tomorrow?" "A little," Cass admitted. "Are you?" Rena considered the question with her characteristic seriousness. "No," she said finally. "I'm not worried." "Why not, sweetheart?" "Because I have both of you now, and love makes people strong enough to do impossible things." Looking at her daughter's peaceful expression, at the man who'd become her husband and Rena's father in the span of days, Cass felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Absolute faith that tomorrow would bring exactly what they needed, even if what they needed was a miracle. Chapter 9. The Dark Hour. The morning of Rena's surgery dawned gray and overcast, as if the Texas sky itself was holding its breath in anticipation of what the day would bring. Cass woke in the uncomfortable reclining chair beside Rena's bed, her hand automatically reaching for her daughter before her eyes even opened. The movement had become instinctive over the past weeks, checking, always checking, to make sure Rena was still breathing, still fighting, still there. "Good morning, Mrs. Woods," Darren said softly from the other chair, where he'd spent the night watching both his wife and daughter sleep. The title still felt surreal, wonderful, and terrifying all at once. "Good morning, Mr. Woods," Cass replied, a small smile playing at her lips despite the crushing weight of the day ahead. In all the chaos and fear, they hadn't had time to process the magnitude of what they'd done. Not just the marriage, but the complete transformation of their lives in the space of a week. "Is it time yet?" Rena's voice was small and brave, her eyes opening to find both parents already awake and watching over her. "Soon, Princess," Darren said, moving to sit on the edge of her bed. "Dr. Vasquez will be here in an hour to talk to us before we go downstairs." "Are you ready?" Cass asked gently, smoothing Rena's hair back from her forehead. Rena considered the question with the seriousness she brought to everything important. "I think so. I'm scared, but I'm also excited." "Excited?" Darren's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Because maybe after today my heart will be strong enough to run and play like other kids. Maybe I'll be able to go to school and make friends and have adventures." Rena's eyes sparkled with the kind of hope that only children could maintain in the face of impossible odds. "Maybe I'll get to grow up and be just like Mama, strong and brave and beautiful." The words hit both adults like physical blows, the casual way their daughter spoke about a future that hung on a 10% chance of survival. Cass felt tears threaten, but she forced them back, determined to match Rena's courage with her own. "You're already strong and brave and beautiful," Darren said, his voice rough with emotion. "You're the strongest person I know." "That's because you haven't met my mama yet," Rena replied with a giggle that sounded exactly like the carefree child she should have been allowed to be. "She's the strongest person in the whole world. She took care of me all by herself for 6 whole years." "And now we take care of each other," Cass said firmly. "All 3 of us, together." When Dr. Vasquez arrived an hour later, she brought with her the controlled energy of a surgeon preparing for the most complex procedure of her career. The experimental surgery would involve completely rebuilding Rena's damaged heart using a combination of artificial materials and tissue grafts, a procedure so new that only 3 other children in the world had undergone it. "The surgery will take 12 to 14 hours, Dr. Vasquez explained, her voice gentle but honest. "We'll need to stop her heart completely and keep her on bypass while we work. There will be critical moments where things could go wrong very quickly." "What are the specific risks?" Darren asked, his businessman's mind needing concrete information even as his father's heart was breaking. "Organ failure, stroke, bleeding complications, infection, rejection of the artificial components." Dr. Vasquez's voice was clinical, but her eyes were kind. "Any of these could be fatal, but Rena has something going for her that most children don't." "What's that?" Cass asked. "She has parents who love her unconditionally, who've fought for her, who've given her the emotional strength to endure what most adults couldn't handle. That matters more than you might think." As they prepared to take Rena to surgery, the little girl insisted on a few minutes alone with each parent. Cass went first, holding her daughter close and whispering all the love and hope and desperate prayers that had been building in her chest for months. "Mama," Rena said softly, "if something happens to me, I want you to be happy. I want you to love Daddy and let him love you back. Promise me you won't be sad forever." "Nothing is going to happen to you," Cass whispered fiercely. "You're going to beat the 10%, and we're going to go home and be a family." "But if it does," Rena persisted with the determination that had carried her through 6 years of medical struggles, "promise me." "I promise," Cass said, the words coming out broken and desperate. "But only if you promise me you'll fight as hard as you can to come back to us." "I promise, Mama. I love you. I love you too, baby. More than all the stars in the sky." When it was Darren's turn, he found himself overwhelmed by the magnitude of what this small person had brought into his life. A week ago, he'd been a successful but empty man. Now he was a father, a husband, someone with everything to lose and everything to fight for. "Daddy," Rena said seriously, "will you take care of Mama if I can't come back?" The question stopped Darren's breath entirely. "Rena, you are coming back. We're not even considering any other possibility." "But if I can't," she continued with devastating matter-of-factness, "Mama will need someone to remind her to eat and sleep and not work too much. She forgets to take care of herself when she's sad." "You're going to be here to remind her yourself," Darren said firmly, "because you're the bravest, strongest little girl in the world, and you're going to beat this." "I hope so," Rena said simply, "because I really want to see what it's like to have a daddy teach me to ride a bike and help me with homework and scare away boys when I'm older." The image of that future, of normal, everyday father-daughter moments, made Darren's chest tighten with longing and determination. "I'm going to teach you all of those things and more," he promised. "We're going to have a lifetime of adventures together. I love you, Daddy. Thank you for choosing to be my father. Thank you for choosing to be my daughter, Princess. You saved my life just as much as we're trying to save yours." As the surgical team prepared to take Rena away, she insisted on one final family moment. They stood together in the hallway outside the operating room, Darren and Cass on either side of the gurney, holding their daughter's hands while she looked up at them with absolute trust and love. Remember, Rena said solemnly, no matter what happens, we're a family now, forever and always. Nothing can change that. The words followed them into the surgical waiting room, where they settled in for the longest day of their lives. 12 to 14 hours of not knowing, of hoping, of praying to every deity either of them had ever believed in. For the first 6 hours, everything proceeded according to plan. Dr. Vasquez sent regular updates through the surgical coordinator. They'd successfully stopped Rena's heart and put her on bypass. They'd begun the delicate work of removing damaged tissue. They were making good progress. But at hour 7, everything changed. At hour 8, the surgical coordinator appeared with an expression that made Cass's stomach drop to her feet. "Doctor, Vasquez needs to speak with you," she said, her professional composure barely masking obvious concern. "There have been developments." They found the surgeon in a small consultation room, still in her surgical gown, exhaustion and worry etched in every line of her face. She didn't waste time with gentle preambles. "We've encountered severe complications with the valve integration," she said bluntly. "Rena's immune system is attacking the titanium components more aggressively than our suppressants can control. We're seeing inflammatory responses that are causing dangerous arrhythmias, and her blood pressure has become critically unstable." "What are her chances now?" Cass asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. "If we can't control the immune response in the next 2 hours, we'll have to remove the new components. At that point—" Dr. Vasquez's voice trailed off, but they all understood. At that point, Rena would die. She didn't need to finish the sentence. They all knew what failure meant. "Can we see her?" Darren asked, his voice strangely calm despite the chaos raging in his chest. "Not yet. We need every available moment to try to save her. But I wanted you to know where we stand." As Dr. Vasquez hurried back into surgery, Cass and Darren found themselves alone in the hallway, facing the very real possibility that their daughter, their miracle, their heart, their entire world, might not survive the next hour. "She's going to make it," Cass said fiercely, as if saying the words could make them true. "She has to make it." But even as she spoke, alarms began sounding from within the operating room, and they could hear the controlled chaos of a medical team fighting desperately to save a small life that hung in the balance. The darkest hour of their lives had begun, and all they could do was hold each other and pray that love would be enough to bring their daughter home. Chapter 10. Miracle and New Beginnings. The alarms stopped. After 3 hours of chaos, after consultations with cardiac specialists around the world, after moments when Dr. Vasquez emerged from surgery with increasingly grim updates, the sudden silence from the operating room was more terrifying than any sound had been. Cass and Darren sat in the waiting room holding each other, both of them afraid to breathe, afraid to hope, afraid to even think about what the silence might mean. They'd been through every emotion possible over the past 15 hours. Terror, hope, despair, rage at the unfairness of watching their child fight for her life. "Mr. and Mrs. Woods?" They looked up to find Dr. Vasquez standing in the doorway, still in her surgical scrubs, her face unreadable. She looked exhausted, like someone who'd just fought the battle of her professional life. But there was something in her eyes that made Cass's heart stop entirely. "Doctor." Darren's voice was barely a whisper. Dr. Vasquez's exhausted face slowly transformed, but her smile was tempered with the caution of someone who had seen too many medical miracles turn into false hopes. "The surgery was successful beyond our most optimistic projections," she said, her voice carefully measured. "We managed to control the immune response using an experimental immunosuppressive protocol that we've never tried before. Rena's new heart components are functioning well, but she'll need intensive monitoring and lifelong medication management." "But she's going to live?" Darren asked, afraid to believe it. The immediate crisis has passed and her vital signs are stable. We'll know more over the next few weeks, but yes, I believe she's going to live and live well. Dr. Vasquez's professional reserve cracked slightly. She's stronger than any of us anticipated. She's more than okay, Dr. Vasquez said, tears now streaming down her own face. Her body not only accepted the artificial components, it integrated them so completely that her heart function is testing at levels we've never seen before. It's as if her heart was always meant to work this way, as if we just gave her body the tools it needed to heal itself. Darren felt his knees buckle, the relief so overwhelming that he couldn't remain standing. Cass caught him and they held each other while the impossible reality sank in. Their daughter was going to live. "Can we see her?" Cass asked through her tears. "She's still unconscious from the anesthesia, but yes, she'll be in the cardiac ICU for monitoring, but her vital signs are so strong that we expect her to wake up within the hour." The walk to the cardiac ICU felt like floating through a dream. After so many weeks of hospital corridors filled with dread and desperation, walking toward their daughter's room with hope and joy felt surreal, magical, like stepping into a fairy tale they'd never dared to believe could be real. Rena looked so small in the ICU bed, surrounded by monitors and machines, but the numbers on every screen told the story of a healthy, strong heart beating steadily in her chest. Her color was better than it had been in months, her breathing easy and natural. "Hello, Princess," Darren whispered, taking her small hand in his. "We're here. We're right here, and we're never leaving." As if summoned by his voice, Rena's eyes fluttered open, focusing slowly on her parents' faces hovering above her. "Mama? Daddy?" Her voice was hoarse from the breathing tube, but it was the most beautiful sound either of them had ever heard. "We're here, baby," Cass said, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "We're right here." "Did it work?" Rena asked, her hand moving instinctively to her chest. "Is my heart fixed?" "Your heart is perfect," Dr. Vasquez said, appearing beside them with a smile that seemed to light up the entire room. "Better than perfect, actually. You, young lady, just made medical history." "Does that mean I can go home soon?" Rena asked hopefully. "It means you can go home and have the normal childhood you deserve," Dr. Vasquez replied. "School, friends, sports, everything other kids your age get to do." The wonder in Rena's eyes as the reality of her future sank in was breathtaking. "I can really run and play?" "You can do anything you want to do," Darren said firmly. "Anything at all." "I want to learn to ride a bike," Rena said immediately. "And I want to go to school and make friends and maybe learn to swim. Can I learn to swim, Daddy?" "We'll start with swimming lessons as soon as the doctors say it's okay," Darren promised, his heart swelling with joy at the simple normalcy of planning everyday activities for his daughter. "And I want to go to school like other kids," Rena continued, her excitement growing as the possibilities of her new life became real. "And maybe someday help other sick kids too." "That's actually something I've been thinking about," Darren said, glancing at Cass. "Once we're all settled and you're fully recovered, I'd like to explore starting a foundation for families dealing with pediatric heart conditions. But that's a conversation for the future. Right now, we focus on getting you strong enough to come home." Cass stared at him in amazement. "A foundation?" "The Rena Woods Foundation for Pediatric Cardiac Care," Darren explained. "Fully funded, focused on providing comprehensive support for families dealing with complex heart conditions. And I can't think of anyone better qualified to run it than someone who's lived through every challenge we want to help other families overcome." "You named it after me?" Rena asked, her eyes wide with wonder. "You inspired it," Darren replied simply. "You and your mama showed me what real courage looks like, what love can accomplish when it refuses to give up. If this foundation can help even one other family avoid some of the struggles you've faced, then your fight will have saved more lives than just your own. 8 months after her surgery, following a careful recovery process monitored by specialists in both Houston and their home city, Rena was finally cleared for all normal childhood activities. The experimental immunosuppressive protocol had worked better than anyone dared hope, and her artificial heart components showed no signs of rejection. 1 year later, Cass stood in the backyard of their new home, watching her husband teach their daughter to ride the bright pink bicycle he'd bought for her 8th birthday. Rena was laughing as she pedaled across the grass, Darren jogging alongside with one protective hand near her shoulder, ready to steady her if needed. "Look, Mama!" Rena called out as she found her balance and began riding confidently on her own. "I'm really doing it." Cass pulled out her phone and captured the moment, this ordinary, extraordinary scene of a healthy child learning to ride a bike while her father cheered her on. After so many months of hospital rooms and medical procedures, the simple normalcy of it took her breath away. That evening, after Rena had fallen asleep in her own bed in her own room, exhausted from a day of bike riding and playing with the neighborhood children, who'd quickly become her devoted friends, Cass and Darren sat on their porch swing, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. "I got the call from the lawyers today," Darren said quietly. "The Rena Woods Foundation has been approved for nonprofit status. We can start helping other families next month." "Are you sure you want to name it after her?" Cass asked, though she knew the answer. "She inspired it," Darren replied simply, "and she insisted on being involved in the planning. Have you seen her presentation about making hearts happy? She's going to make an excellent board member someday." "Do you ever think about how we got here?" Cass asked, nestled against Darren's side. "Every day," Darren replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "A desperate mother's plea outside a hospital, a dying child's wish to know a father's love, 10% odds that somehow became 100% certainty." "It still feels like a miracle," Cass said softly. "That's because it is a miracle," Darren replied. "Not just Rena's recovery, but all of it. Finding each other, becoming a family, learning what love really means." From inside the house, they could hear Rena talking in her sleep, telling someone in her dreams about her perfect day, her wonderful parents, her amazing new life. The sound was pure contentment, the voice of a child who knew without question that she was cherished, protected, and loved beyond measure. "Daddy," Rena's voice called out suddenly from her bedroom window above them. "Mama, come look at the stars with me." They looked up to see her silhouetted in her window, pointing excitedly at the brilliant night sky. Without hesitation, they went inside and climbed the stairs to her room, where she was kneeling on her bed with her face pressed to the glass. "Look how bright they are," she said in wonder. "Do you think the other kids who need new hearts can see them too?" "I'm sure they can," Cass said, settling beside her daughter. "Good," Rena said with satisfaction, "because I want them to know that miracles are real, that sometimes when things seem impossible, love finds a way to make them possible anyway." As they sat together looking out at the infinite sky, 3 hearts beating in perfect rhythm, Cass reflected on the truth of her daughter's words. Love had found a way, through desperation to hope, through strangers to family, through a 10% chance to a lifetime of possibilities. Their story had begun with a dying child's wish to know a father's love. It had become a testament to the power of chosen family, the miracle of healing, and the absolute certainty that love, when it was real and fierce and unshakable, could indeed move heaven and earth. And in their beautiful home, with their daughter healthy and happy and dreaming of tomorrow's adventures, Darren and Cass Woods knew they were living proof that some fairy tales were real, especially the ones that began with someone brave enough to ask a stranger for the impossible.